Alright, this is the last video for wall sections. We're going to add the annotation. And we're going to use the wall section example that we have here to figure out what we're going to add for annotation. So I'm just going to kind of get you going on it until it shows more or less what you want to be doing. Some of the dimensions here aren't being shown, and I'm going to go ahead and add that information for you so you can identify what it should be. Alright, so let's go to AutoCAD and we'll start with those dimension lines. And remember that we set up an architectural template, so we should already have a dimension style for an architectural layout. If you don't have this yet, then you want to go back to the architectural template videos and watch those to figure out how to create this architectural dimension style. So make sure that architectural dimension style is current. Double click to activate the model space viewport, and we're going to add some critical dimensions that we should have in any architectural drawing to identify the building line areas, or the spots where kind of the construction team would start and stop construction. So we're going to start with the top of foundation wall. I'm going to use the dim linear command and go from there to the top of subfloor. And that's going to give us what our dimensions are for our floor platform plus the mudsill thickness. Now from there I'm going to continue, so I'm going to use DCO, continue that dimension to the top of the wall on the first floor. And that should give us our wall height that we have. And then I'm going to continue to the subfloor for the second floor, and then go right up to the top of wall for our second floor. So those are the basic dimensions that we want to identify for the top of wall to top of subfloor, or where the platforms are. Now if we want to also include what we're going to have for finished floor to finished ceiling, we don't necessarily need to include that with this dimension. We would just simply take that dimension and subtract 2, and we know that the distance from the bottom of the gypsum wall board to the top of the finished floor would end up being 7 feet 8 3/4 inches. So it's not necessary to have to provide that dimension. So it's usually an either or situation. And we're going to add some annotation. So for an example, I want to make sure I have enough space here to put that annotation, so I might pull those dimensions out a little bit, and I want to organize the annotation from top to bottom or from bottom to top. And usually anything having to do with the exterior construction should be on the outside of the wall. Anything having to do with interior construction should be on the inside of the wall. So I'm going to start with the top here. Just type in LE for leader, point to the 2 top plates, position my leader over here, and then type in 2 2x6 top. Make sure I'm using caps here. Top plate. And if the note is a little bit too long, just click and hit enter to create a second line. So the next call out would be to the header. So I'm going to use the leader command again. Point to the header. Position my leader so that it lines up with the one above, and type in 2 2x4 header. And if these two look like they're a little bit too close together, just stretch that one down. Now it's nice to identify what you're seeing beyond here. So we're going to identify this as our 30/48 casement window beyond. So you notice I'm using a few abbreviations, and WNDW is a acceptable abbreviation for window. Now I need to either stretch all of these over a little bit so I have enough room for that note. Notice I stretch them all instead of just stretching one, so that we can maintain this nice line of leaders to make that look nice and neat. Okay, we'll use another leader command and point to these. This should end up being about here, and then we want that line to be about here, and that should be 2 2x6 subsill. Another way to do this is we can copy that leader down and point to a new section of the wall. So this would end up being 2x6 cripples at 16 inches on center. copy this down a little bit further, change the position of the arrow to point to the shoe plate, and just write out 2x6 shoe. Now here I avoid putting in a call out. You can just type in dtext, pick to place or point. And to define my text height, what I want to do is use the same text height I'm using within my dimension style and text style, which I know I'm using 0.1. And I got to multiply that by what my drawing ratio would be, which was 1 to 16. So I want to multiply 0.1 times 16, or my text height should end up being 1.6. Looks like I ended up kind of bouncing out of that dtext command, so I want 1.6. And I will write in 2 by 8. Now that's the wrong font. I can tell because if you look at these side by side, you can see that's the wrong font. And this happens to you folks a lot, where you might have a few things in the correct font and a few in the wrong font. What this is showing me is that my dimension style has the correct font, but my regular text is not using the same current font. So I'm going to go into ST for text style, and notice that standard is current. I'm going to make MBCRS current, and then make sure that this has been updated to that style. Now it's all the same. Right, move down, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the same notes that I had up above, because this is going to be the same information down here. And I'm just going to copy this down, point to the header. And I'm going to flip back here to remember what we picked for a header would be 2 2x10s. So I'm going to edit this and say 2 2x10s instead. Get rid of the top and put in here header. This is going to say door beyond, and so I can use a 3068 door call out. So 3 foot by 6 feet 8 inch door beyond. And then down here at the bottom we want to add our 2x10 information. So I'm just going to change that 8 to 10. Here we should have a Sill, Mudsill call out, so I'm just going to copy one of these notes up here, point to the Mudsill, making sure I stay in line. So let's move that arrow so it's pointing right at the Mudsill, trying to avoid floating arrows. And this would be a 2x6 Mudsill. And I'm going to stretch that up a little bit so that I have enough room to put another note below that for the sill seal. So pull this down, change the position of the arrow, and just write in sill seal. Those are the general callouts. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other drawing and see if we missed anything from the exterior. So we have, so we'll add that threshold note. I just didn't think it's really necessary to add the 2x10 header joist when you also have the 2x10 here, so we can get rid of that note. We'll add the pressure treated to the Mudsill, and then we just have to add the interior dimensions. So let's go back to our AutoCAD. Copy one of these notes up to here. Call that out as the threshold. We'll add the PT in front of here for pressure treated 2x6 Mudsill. And now we just have to add the interior note. So I'm going to use some typical stuff so that we don't have to write this stuff out more than once. So this should say 1/2 inch GWB, stands for gypsum wallboard, and then TYP for typical. Now I'm going to add another leader by just mirroring this leader over to the other side. And then we'll just have that leader also point to the ceiling so that we know now the gypsum wallboard is 1/2 inch both on the ceiling and on the walls. And then we're going to add the strapping dimension. We're also going to add a typical after that so I don't have to do it up above. So this would be 1x3 strapping at 16 inches OC. And down here we want to add our finished floor and subfloor information, so I'm going to use the leader command. Type in NEA for near and call this out as 3/4 inch T and G sheathing typical. Now I don't have to do it above, and then use the leader command again, and we'll call out this finished floor as 3/4 inch finished floor typical as well. So some of this other stuff, like for instance here, we could probably get away with just saying this is typical on our top floor or our bottom floor. So if we add top plate typical, then I can get rid of this one up here, for instance. Now these headers are two different sizes, so we don't want to keep that. We don't want to remove that, but this 2x6 shoe is also typical, so I could add that, and then I don't have to repeat it again within the wall. So anything you see that is a repeating information, you can go ahead and write typical, and where it's obvious that it's showing up, you don't have to write it again. So this takes care of pretty much all of our callouts. Just adding a finished floor there, so we have the same information on this floor that we did on the bottom floor. We have the drawing set to the proper scale. We have the viewport on the viewport layer. We just have to fill in the title block and plot this and to a DWF file. And the assembly in section for architectural assembly is complete.